The bustling airport was alive with the sounds of chatter, rolling suitcases, and hurried announcements over the intercom. People from all walks of life moved through the terminal, some excited for their journeys, others weary from long flights. Among them was Marco, a young Filipino man with an easy smile and a kind demeanor. He carried only a small backpack and a cup of coffee, his eyes darting across the departure screens to confirm his gate. This was supposed to be just another routine flight for him, a quick trip home to see his family after months of hard work in the city. Marco was the kind of person who blended into the crowd. Quiet but observant, polite but never afraid to stand his ground when necessary. But today, blending in wasn't an option, not with Officer Grayson on duty. Grayson was a man who wore his badge like a weapon, tall, imposing, and with a permanent scowl etched into his face. He had a reputation among the airport staff. He wasn't just strict, he was ruthless. His eyes scanned the crowd like a hawk searching for prey, and today, they landed squarely on Marco. Marco noticed the stare almost immediately. It wasn't the casual glance of someone passing by. It was sharp, probing, and unnervingly cold. He shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what he'd done to draw the officer's attention. But before he could fully process the situation, Grayson was already making his way over, his heavy boots echoing on the polished floor. "Sir, I need to see your identification," Grayson demanded, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby travelers. Marco blinked, confused but compliant. He reached into his pocket and handed over his passport. "Is there a problem, officer?" Marco asked, his tone calm but cautious. Grayson didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scrutinized the passport as if searching for something, anything, that could justify his sudden interest. He flipped through the pages slowly, his frown deepening with every second. "Where are you coming from?" Grayson finally asked, his eyes narrowing. "Los Angeles," Marco replied. "I'm just connecting here before heading home to Manila." Grayson's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. "And what exactly is in that backpack of yours?" Marco glanced at his bag, puzzled. "Just some clothes, my laptop, and—" "Step aside," Grayson interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. By now, a small crowd had started to form, their curiosity piqued by the officer's aggressive demeanor. Marco felt the weight of their stares but tried to stay composed. He didn't want to escalate the situation, especially not in a foreign country where the rules were different, and the consequences could be severe. Grayson gestured toward a security checkpoint, where two other officers stood by, watching the interaction closely. Marco followed reluctantly, his heart racing. He knew he had nothing to hide, but the intensity of Grayson's actions made him feel as though he were already guilty of something. "Empty your bag," Grayson barked as soon as they reached the checkpoint. Marco hesitated for a split second, and that was all it took for Grayson to step in closer, his voice now a low growl. "I said, empty it." Marco took a deep breath and unzipped his backpack, carefully laying out its contents on the metal table. A neatly folded shirt, a small toiletry bag, a laptop, and a few snacks were all that appeared. Grayson's frown deepened as he examined each item, his frustration growing more apparent with every passing second. "What exactly are you looking for?" Marco asked, his voice steady but edged with a hint of defiance. Grayson ignored the question, his eyes locking onto Marco instead. "Do you think you're funny? Trying to act all innocent?" Marco's jaw tightened. "I'm not acting. I've done nothing wrong." The tension between them was palpable now, drawing even more onlookers. Some whispered among themselves, while others pulled out their phones to record the unfolding drama. One of the other officers stepped forward, his expression uneasy. "Grayson, maybe we should." "I've got this," Grayson snapped, cutting him off. Marco stood his ground, refusing to let fear show. But inside, his thoughts raced. Why was this happening? What had he done to deserve this kind of treatment? And most importantly, how far would Grayson go to prove a point that didn't even exist? As the seconds ticked by, the atmosphere grew heavier, the silence broken only by the occasional shuffle of feet or the hum of a nearby announcement. Grayson's hand hovered near his holster, his body tense as if anticipating resistance that wasn't there. And then, something unexpected happened. A voice cut through the crowd, loud and clear. "Hey, what's going on here?" Both Marco and Grayson turned toward the source of the interruption. A middle-aged woman with a badge around her neck pushed her way through the onlookers, her face a mix of concern and authority. "I'm the airport supervisor," she announced firmly, "and I'd like to know why this young man is being singled out." Grayson's scowl deepened, but for the first time he hesitated. Marco's heart lifted slightly, sensing that the tide might finally be turning. But the battle wasn't over, not yet. Not with Grayson's pride on the line. The supervisor's piercing gaze locked onto Grayson, and the crowd leaned in, waiting to see what would happen next. Grayson's jaw tightened as the airport supervisor stood her ground. Her sharp tone had sliced through the thick tension like a knife, and for the first time, Grayson didn't have a quick response. His eyes flicked between Marco and the growing crowd, clearly uncomfortable with the unwanted attention, but his grip on control was slipping, and he knew it. Marco's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his expression calm. The supervisor's presence was a small relief, but Grayson wasn't backing down that easily. The officer straightened his posture, squaring his shoulders. "Ma'am, this is a security matter," Grayson said, his voice low but forceful. "I'm handling it." The supervisor's eyes didn't waver. "And what exactly is the security threat here? Because from what I'm seeing, it looks like you're harassing a passenger without cause." Grayson's face darkened. He was acting suspicious. The supervisor raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious? Carrying a backpack and checking a flight gate is suspicious now." Grayson didn't answer. His silence spoke louder than words. The crowd shifted, whispers spreading among the onlookers. A few phones were still raised, recording every second. The situation was quickly spiraling beyond his control, and Grayson knew it. Marco felt a lump in his throat, but he swallowed it down. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew he couldn't let himself look weak. Not now. "Is this how you treat all travelers here?" Marco asked quietly, his voice steady. His words carried weight, drawing murmurs from the crowd. Grayson shot him a glare, but before he could respond, the supervisor stepped in. "That's enough." Her tone was sharp, final. She turned toward Marco, her expression softening slightly. "Sir, I apologize for this. You're free to collect your things." Marco hesitated for a second, eyeing Grayson, but then he carefully began packing his belongings back into his backpack. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. He could still feel the weight of Grayson's eyes on him, heavy with something more than authority, something personal. But why? Grayson didn't move. His fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to push back, to reclaim control, but he couldn't. Not here, not now. The cameras were still on him, and one wrong move could end his career. For now, the supervisor turned back to Grayson. "Officer Grayson, we need to have a word in private." Now. For a moment, it looked like Grayson might refuse. His chest rose and fell slowly as if he were holding back a storm. But finally, without a word, he turned and stalked away, the supervisor following close behind. The crowd slowly began to disperse, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others still whispering about what they had just witnessed. Marco stood there for a moment, his backpack slung over his shoulder, trying to process everything. His body was tense, his mind still spinning. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Are you okay?" Marco turned to see a young woman standing nearby. She had been recording the entire time, her phone still in her hand. She looked concerned, not nosy. "Yeah, I think so," Marco replied, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was true. "I got the whole thing on video," she said. "If you need it, in case, you know." Marco nodded slowly. "Thanks, I appreciate that." She smiled faintly. "People need to see how this stuff happens. It's not right." Before Marco could respond, she gave him a small wave and melted back into the crowd. Marco let out a slow breath, his muscles finally starting to relax. But something told him this wasn't over, not by a long shot. In a quiet office away from the terminal, Grayson paced back and forth. His mind was burning with frustration. The supervisor stood calmly by the door, arms crossed. Do you have any idea what you've just done? She snapped. Grayson stopped pacing and glared at her. I did my job. No, you didn't. You profiled a passenger with zero cause, escalated the situation, and now half the airport has it on video. He was acting suspicious, Grayson shot back. You think I should just ignore my instincts? Instincts, she repeated, disbelief in her tone. Your instincts are going to get this entire department sued. You're on thin ice, Grayson. One more incident like this, and you won't have a badge to hide behind. Grayson's face twisted, but he said nothing. The supervisor shook her head. Get out of my office. Grayson stormed out, slamming the door behind him. But in his mind, the situation wasn't over. Not yet. Back in the terminal, Marco sat on a bench near his gate, staring out at the planes through the massive windows. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft orange glow over the runway. He should have been feeling relieved, but instead, he felt uneasy. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a message from his cousin back home. Asterisk safe travels, bro. Can't wait to see you, asterisk. Marco smiled faintly and typed back, asterisk thanks. Can't wait either. Asterisk. But just as he hit send, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. A figure standing far off in the crowd, watching him. It was Grayson. Not in uniform, no badge, just standing there, eyes locked on Marco. Marco's blood ran cold. Why was Grayson still here? The officer didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared. Marco quickly looked away, pretending not to notice, but his mind was racing. He didn't feel safe anymore. Something was wrong. Grayson wasn't acting like a cop anymore. He was acting like something else entirely. Marco grabbed his backpack and stood up, scanning for security or anyone in authority. But the crowd was thick, and Grayson was gone when Marco looked back. Had he imagined it? No, he knew what he saw. This wasn't over. Grayson wasn't finished. And Marco had a sinking feeling that whatever was coming next was going to be worse. Marco's grip tightened on the strap of his backpack as he scanned the crowd again, but Grayson was nowhere to be seen. The thought of the officer still lingering around unsettled him. Was it paranoia creeping in, or was Grayson really following him? Marco didn't know for sure, but his instincts told him to stay alert. The once busy airport now felt suffocating. Every passerby seemed suspicious, every glance too long, every movement too calculated. Marco needed to get to his gate, but the uneasy feeling in his chest made him hesitate. He considered reporting Grayson, but to who? The same system that gave Grayson a badge? That idea seemed pointless. His phone buzzed again. It was a message from the same girl who had recorded the earlier confrontation. Asterisk hey, it's Mia. Just checking in. That officer was out of line. If you need me to send you the video, let me know. Asterisk. Marco stared at the message, thinking that video could be important. Maybe it was the only thing protecting him now. Asterisk yeah, please send it. Thank you asterisk he replied. Moments later, the video arrived. Marco watched the clip, seeing himself standing there, confused, while Grayson barked orders. Watching it from another perspective made the entire situation feel even more unreal. But what caught Marco's attention wasn't Grayson. It was the other officers in the background. One of them, a younger officer with a hesitant look, seemed uncomfortable. His body language was stiff, and he kept glancing at Grayson nervously. Why didn't he step in? Marco replayed that part of the video, focusing on the young officer. Maybe he knew something. Maybe he wasn't okay with how Grayson handled things. A sudden announcement overhead snapped Marco out of his thoughts. His flight was boarding soon. He needed to make a decision, get on the plane and leave this nightmare behind, or stay and figure out why Grayson seemed so determined to intimidate him. But could he even walk away that easily? As Marco moved toward the gate, his phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. Asterisk, you need to watch your back. Not everyone here plays by the rules. Asterisk. Marco's chest tightened. His eyes darted around the terminal, scanning every face. Who was this? Was it a warning or a threat? He quickly typed back. Asterisk, whoa, is this? Asterisk. No response. Marco felt the walls closing in. This wasn't random anymore. It was bigger than a single confrontation. He thought back to Grayson's eyes. Cold, calculating. This wasn't about security or suspicion. This was personal. Across the terminal, Officer Grayson sat in a dim corner, his uniform gone, replaced with plain clothes. His jaw clenched as he stared at his phone. The supervisor's words echoed in his mind, but they didn't matter. Not anymore. Grayson had seen something in Marco, something he wasn't willing to ignore. And then there was the text. Grayson smirked slightly. Someone else was involved now. Someone was watching Marco, just like he was. But this wasn't about following orders anymore. This was about control. Back at the security office, Officer Daniels, the young officer from the video, leaned back in his chair, staring at the blank report form on his computer. He should have written the incident report by now, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. What was he supposed to write? That Officer Grayson harassed a passenger without cause. That he felt powerless to intervene. Daniels rubbed his face with both hands. He had only been with airport security for 2 years. Grayson had been here for over a decade, and everyone knew not to cross him. But Daniels had seen something today that didn't sit right. His thoughts were interrupted when his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. Asterisk. You saw what happened. Don't let it slide. Asterisk. Daniel's blood ran cold. Who sent that? How did they know? He typed back quickly. Asterisk. Whoa, is this? Asterisk. No response. Daniel stared at the screen, anxiety creeping in. Maybe it was a bluff. Or maybe someone was watching more than just Marco. Meanwhile, Marco made his way to a quieter part of the terminal, needing space to think. He leaned against a pillar, watching travelers pass by without a care in the world. How was he supposed to act normal when he felt like prey in a hunter's game? His mind raced back to the text. Asterisk. Not everyone here plays by the rules. Asterisk. That couldn't have been Grayson. Grayson wasn't subtle. This was someone else, someone who knew things. Marco thought about Daniels, the officer who looked uncomfortable. Maybe he could help, but how would he even reach him? Marco opened his phone and searched the airport's public security contact. If Daniels was working, maybe he could find a way to reach him discreetly. He dialed the number. Airport security, how can I help you? A woman answered. Marco hesitated. Hi, I need to speak to one of the officers working today. I think his name is Daniels. It's important. There was a pause. 1 moment. Marco's pulse quickened. After a few moments, Daniels' cautious voice came on the line. This is Officer Daniels. Marco took a deep breath. You were there earlier, when that officer, Grayson, stopped me. I saw you. You didn't look okay with what was happening. There was silence. You shouldn't be calling here, Daniels finally said, his voice low. I just want to know what's going on. Why is Grayson after me? Daniels hesitated again. Look, you need to get on your flight and go. Don't ask questions. Just leave. I think it's bigger than that, Marco pressed. Someone just texted me. They said I should watch my back. This isn't random, is it? Daniel's breathing was heavier now. I can't talk here. The line went dead. Marco pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the screen in disbelief. Cut off. Was Daniels scared? Or was someone listening in? Marco's legs felt heavier now. He was tangled in something he didn't understand, and the people who could explain it were too afraid to talk. From a distance, Grayson watched Marco hang up the phone. His eyes narrowed. This wasn't over. And Marco was running out of time. Marco's hands trembled slightly as he lowered his phone. The abrupt end to the call with Officer Daniels leaving a heavy silence in his ears. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to get on the plane and leave this nightmare behind. But something stronger held him in place. The warning texts, the silent threats, Grayson's chilling stare, none of it felt random. It was all connected, and if Marco didn't figure out how, it might not end with him. The airport now felt like a maze, each hallway and security checkpoint more suffocating than the last. Marco's eyes scanned every shadow, every face in the crowd. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Not just Grayson. Someone else. Whoever had sent that text was out there, hidden among the sea of travelers. Marco's mind went back to Daniels. The fear in his voice was real. If even an officer was too scared to speak up, then this wasn't just about Grayson abusing his authority. This was deeper. Maybe Grayson wasn't working alone. His phone buzzed again, snapping him back to reality. Another message from the same unknown number. Asterisk, you're running out of time. They won't let you leave. Asterisk. Marco's heart slammed against his ribs. Before he could reply, a voice startled him. Marco. He spun around, his breath catching in his throat. It was Mia, the girl who had recorded the earlier incident. Her face was tense, her eyes darting nervously over his shoulder. What are you still doing here? She whispered, glancing around. You should have been on that plane by now. Marco shook his head. Something's wrong. I think Grayson is following me. And someone else. Someone's been sending me messages. Mia's eyes widened. Messages? What do they say? Marco showed her the screen. Her lips tightened. This isn't just some random cop on a power trip. If they're threatening you, it's bigger than that. I need to find Daniels. He knows something, Marco said, glancing at the security station across the terminal. Mia hesitated. If Grayson sees you near security, it might make things worse. I don't care. I need answers. But before Marco could move, Mia grabbed his arm. Wait. Look. Marco followed her gaze. Two uniformed security officers were moving through the crowd, but something felt off. They weren't scanning the area like normal patrols, they were looking for someone. One of them held a phone, checking the screen, then scanning the crowd again. They're looking for you, Mia whispered. They know where you are. Marco's stomach dropped. He instinctively stepped back, pulling his hoodie over his head. How did they know I was here? He muttered. Mia's expression darkened. They could be tracking your phone. Marco's blood ran cold. He quickly switched his phone to airplane mode, but the damage might have already been done. We need to move, Mia urged. They weaved through the crowded terminal, moving away from the gates. Marco's mind raced. If Grayson had other officers working with him, escaping through security wasn't an option. He needed to find Daniels. But how? Suddenly, Marco remembered the staff-only areas. If Daniels was hiding, he wouldn't be on the main floor. Marco turned to Mia. Do you know how to get into the restricted areas? She hesitated. Maybe. My cousin works here. He showed me a few back halls once. But if we get caught, we don't have a choice. Mia nodded reluctantly and led Marco toward a maintenance door tucked behind a food court. She glanced around before pulling it open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit hallway. They slipped inside, the door clicking shut behind them. The noise of the airport faded, replaced by the low hum of machinery and distant footsteps. Marco exhaled slowly. Okay, where would Daniels be? Mia thought for a moment. There's a security break room a few floors down. If he's hiding, he might be there. They moved quickly, the hallways twisting and turning like a maze. Every shadow felt alive. Every creak in the floor made Marco's pulse spike. As they turned a corner, voices echoed ahead. Two security officers were talking quietly near a stairwell. Marco caught one of the names, Grayson. Mia pulled Marco back into the shadows. Grayson says the kid can't leave. Orders came from upstairs, one officer muttered. And if the supervisor finds out, she won't. Grayson has it covered. Marco's breath hitched. Asterisk orders from upstairs, asterisk. This wasn't just Grayson's vendetta. Someone higher up wanted him stopped. Mia's grip on his arm tightened. We can't stay here. They moved silently down another hall until they reached a service elevator. Mia hit the button, glancing nervously behind them. The elevator creaked open, and they slipped inside. As the doors closed, Marco's thoughts spiraled. This was worse than he imagined. It wasn't just one corrupt cop, it was something bigger. A network. But why him? The elevator jolted to a stop, and the doors slid open. The hallway ahead was empty, lined with security offices. They moved carefully, checking each door until Marco spotted a familiar figure through a window. Daniels. He was alone, pacing nervously. Marco knocked lightly. Daniels nearly jumped out of his skin, but when he saw Marco, his face paled. He opened the door just enough to speak. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be gone. They're coming after me. Grayson isn't working alone, Marco said, his voice low but urgent. You know something, tell me. Daniels swallowed hard. I shouldn't even be talking to you. You don't have a choice anymore. If they're after me, they'll come for you too. Daniels hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. Grayson's connected. He's not just some airport cop. He's tied to private security contracts, black market stuff, smuggling. Marco's blood ran cold. Smuggling what? Anything. Weapons, tech, documents. This airport's a hub for it. You must have seen something or been flagged by mistake. Grayson thinks you're a threat. Marco's mind reeled. He had no idea about any of this. Daniels stepped closer. But it's not just him. His boss covers for him. They've got people on the inside. A loud bang echoed from down the hall. Daniels froze. Mia's eyes widened. They found us. Marco's pulse spiked. Daniels opened the door wider. There's a maintenance tunnel under the building. It leads out to the cargo bays. It's your only shot. Heavy footsteps pounded closer. Marco didn't wait. He bolted down the hall with Mia, Daniels right behind them. Behind them, Grayson's cold voice echoed. End of the line, kid. Marco didn't look back. The walls seemed to close in, and the only thing Marco could hear was the sound of his own breath, fast, shallow, and desperate. This wasn't survival anymore. This was war. Marco's lungs burned as he sprinted down the narrow hallway, Mia close on his heels and Daniels trailing behind. The distant echo of boots slamming against the floor chased them like a shadow. Grayson's voice still lingered in Marco's mind, calm, cold, certain. Asterisk, end of the line, kid. Asterisk. But Marco wasn't ready for this to be the end. Daniels yanked open a rusted metal door, revealing a steep set of stairs descending into darkness. This way, Daniels hissed. Marco didn't hesitate. He charged down the steps, each footfall echoing off the concrete walls. The air grew colder, damper, as they descended into the maintenance tunnels below the airport. Pipes lined the ceiling, hissing softly, and the flickering lights barely lit the narrow path ahead. Daniel slammed the door behind them, twisting the lock. That'll buy us a few minutes, he panted. Marco glanced back, trying to steady his breath. Where does this lead? Cargo bay, but it's not safe for long. Grayson has people everywhere, Daniel said, wiping sweat from his brow. Maya's eyes darted nervously. So what's the plan? We can't just keep running. Daniels hesitated, his face tense. There's something you need to know. Grayson isn't just after you because of the airport incident. He thinks you have something. Marco's brows furrowed. What are you talking about? I don't have anything. Daniels shook his head. That's not what he believes. There's been a leak in their smuggling operation. Sensitive data. Someone was supposed to move a flash drive through the airport today, but it went missing. Grayson thinks it ended up with you. Marco's stomach dropped. A flash drive? I don't have anything like that. Daniels looked skeptical. Think, did anyone bump into you? Slip something into your bag? Anything unusual? Marco's mind raced. The security line, the crowded terminal, and then it hit him. The man in the hoodie. Earlier that day, Marco had been bumped by a man in a gray hoodie, muttering a quick apology before disappearing into the crowd. He hadn't thought anything of it. Marco yanked his backpack off his shoulders and tore through it. Clothes, charger, snacks. Then his hand brushed against something cold and metallic wedged into a side pocket he never used. His heart stopped. He pulled out a small, unmarked flash drive. Mia gasped. Daniels paled. Oh my God, Marco whispered. I didn't even know this was in here. Daniels took a step back. That's why Grayson won't stop. He thinks you're the leak. And now that you've found it, you're even more dangerous to him. Marco stared at the tiny device, his hand shaking. What's on it? Mia asked. Daniels shook his head. I don't know, but if Grayson's willing to kill for it, it's big. Whatever it is, it could expose everything. Marco's grip tightened around the flash drive. The weight of it felt heavier than it should. A sudden metallic clang echoed through the tunnel. They all froze. That's them, Daniels whispered. Heavy footsteps began descending the stairs above them. We need to move. Now. Daniels led them deeper into the tunnels, weaving through the maze of pipes and shadowy corners. The air was colder now, and the walls seemed to close in around them. As they rounded a corner, Daniels suddenly stopped short. Marco nearly slammed into him. What's wrong? Daniels turned slowly, his face pale. They're ahead of us. Emerging from the shadows was a figure Marco didn't recognize. An older man in a sleek black suit, holding a radio in one hand and a silenced pistol in the other. His eyes were sharp, calculating. You've made this much harder than it needed to be, the man said coolly. Daniel stepped protectively in front of Marco and Mia. Who are you? The man gave a thin smile. Let's just say I clean up problems. And right now, you three are my problem. Marco's grip tightened on the flash drive. The man raised the pistol. But before he could fire, the pipes above them burst with a deafening bang, releasing a cloud of steam. Run, Daniel shouted. Marco didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Maya's hand and they bolted through the fog. Shots cracked behind them, silenced but deadly. The man wasn't alone. More shadows moved in the steam. Marco's mind spun. Grayson wasn't the only threat. There were people above him. Professionals. They burst through another metal door, spilling into the cargo bay. Towering crates loomed in every direction. Forklifts sat abandoned, and the hum of distant machinery filled the air. Daniel slammed the door shut and locked it. Marco bent over, gasping for breath. Who was that guy? Daniels shook his head. Not airport security. Private contractors. Grayson's got them on his payroll to clean up messes. This is bigger than we thought. Mia's voice trembled. What do we do now? Marco looked at the flash drive in his hand. We expose this. Daniels hesitated. You don't understand. Grayson has friends in high places. You can't just upload it to the internet. They'll shut it down before anyone sees it. Marco's mind raced. Then who can we trust? Daniels was quiet for a moment. There's a journalist, Lydia Tran. She's been investigating corruption at the airport for years. If anyone can get this out, it's her. Marco didn't hesitate. How do we find her? Daniels pulled out his phone. I can get a hold of her, but we need to get out of here first. A sharp bang echoed in the cargo bay. They froze. The suited man's cold voice rang out in the distance. You can't run forever. Marco's pulse pounded in his ears. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about bringing down a system that would rather kill him than be exposed. And time was running out. Marco's pulse hammered in his ears as the cold, echoing voice of the suited man drifted through the vast cargo bay. The shadows between the crates felt alive, crawling closer with every second. Daniels pulled Marco and Mia behind a stack of large metal containers, his breath ragged. We're running out of time, Daniels whispered. Marco clutched the flash drive tightly in his fist. Call Lydia. Now. Daniels fumbled with his phone, dialing the number with shaking hands. It rang once, twice, then connected. A woman's sharp voice answered Daniels. It's me. We have something big, proof of Grayson's smuggling operation, but we're trapped in the cargo bay. They sent people after us. There was a pause. Where exactly are you? Marco leaned in. Can she help us? Daniels nodded. She might. Lydia's well connected. Lydia's voice was firm. Get to Dock 14. I have someone there who can help. But you need to move now. Daniels ended the call and turned to Marco and Mia. Dock 14. That's our only shot. Suddenly, a loud metallic clang echoed from above. They looked up to see Grayson himself standing on a catwalk, flanked by two security guards. His cold eyes locked onto Marco, and a smirk spread across his face. You really thought you could outsmart me? Grayson's voice boomed, calm and confident. Hand over the drive, and maybe I'll let the girl walk. Marco's grip on the flash drive tightened. Daniels cursed under his breath. We have to go. They sprinted between towering crates, Grayson barking orders from above. More men in black suits emerged, spreading out like wolves closing in on their prey. Marco's legs burned, but he didn't slow down. Every step brought them closer to Dock 14, or so he hoped. They reached a massive metal door labeled *, Dock 14 *. Daniels pounded on it. Moments later, it creaked open, revealing a woman in a dark leather jacket, holding a crowbar. Her sharp eyes flicked between them. Lydia sent me. Let's go. She led them into a delivery truck, its engine already running. Marco, Mia, and Daniels scrambled inside, and the woman slammed the door shut. Tires screeched as the truck lurched forward. Grayson's furious shout echoed behind them, but it was drowned by the roar of the engine. For a moment, it felt like they had escaped. Marco leaned back, chest heaving, but something felt off. The woman glanced at Marco through the rearview mirror. You have the drive. Marco hesitated, then slowly nodded. Her eyes darkened. Good. Before anyone could react, she slammed the brakes. Marco was thrown forward, hitting the side of the truck. What the hell? Daniels shouted. The woman turned, pulling out a gun. You didn't think Lydia was the only one interested in this, did you? Marco's blood ran cold. You're with them. A cold smirk crossed her face. Not exactly. But Grayson's not the only one who wants that drive. Hand it over. Daniels reached for his weapon, but she aimed the gun at Mia. Try it, and she dies. Marco's mind raced. They had nowhere to run. But then, the truck jolted again, this time from an impact. Gunfire erupted outside. The woman spun around cursing. Daniels tackled her, the gun skidding across the floor. Marco lunged for it, grabbing the weapon just as the truck door was ripped open. Grayson's men stormed in, weapons raised. But behind them, another figure appeared. Lydia herself, holding a camera in one hand and a small drone hovering beside her. You're live, she said coldly. Grayson's men froze. Every second of the chaos was being streamed online. Lydia smirked. Go ahead. Shoot. Let the world see what kind of men you are. The suited men hesitated, realizing the trap. Grayson himself appeared at the truck's edge, his face a mask of rage. But now, millions were watching. Daniels, bruised but standing, turned to Grayson. It's over. You can't bury this. But Grayson didn't move. Instead, he smiled. You think this ends with me, he sneered. I'm just a pawn. Take me down, and another will replace me. Marco stared at him, horrified. Grayson raised his hands in mock surrender, but his words lingered. Lydia stepped forward, unshaken. Let's see how far this rabbit hole goes. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Grayson's men slowly lowered their weapons. But as the officers swarmed in, Marco noticed something chilling. The woman in the leather jacket, the one who betrayed them, was gone. Vanished into the chaos. And so was the flash drive. Marco's heart sank. Lydia's eyes narrowed. She's not one of Grayson's. Someone else wanted that data. Marco's fists clenched. It wasn't over. Not yet.